The morning sun filtered through the windows of the police station break room, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Lieutenant Marcus Doyle stood by the coffee machine, his Navy uniform crisp and decorated with the medals of a man who had served his country with honor for 15 years. In his hands, he held an old, weathered leather briefcase, its surface scratched and scarred by decades of wear. "Hey everyone, check this out," Officer Jenkins called out, his voice dripping with amusement. Lieutenant Doyle brought his grandfather's old lunchbox to work. Laughter rippled through the room. Marcus had only been assigned to this precinct for a week, part of a special military liaison program designed to strengthen cooperation between local law enforcement and the armed forces. He was used to the camaraderie of his SEAL team, where respect was earned and freely given. This was different. "That's quite the antique you've got there, Lieutenant," Officer Rodriguez chimed in, leaning against the wall with a smirk. "Planning to auction it off? Might get $20 if you're lucky." Marcus ran his fingers over the briefcase's brass clasps, feeling the weight of history in his hands. His grandfather, William Doyle, had passed away 2 months ago at the age of 98. The funeral had been small, attended by a handful of elderly veterans and Marcus himself. His grandfather had been a quiet man, rarely speaking about his experiences during World War II. When the lawyer read the will, Marcus had been surprised to learn he was inheriting anything at all. They hadn't been particularly close in recent years, separated by distance and the demands of military service. The briefcase had been delivered to him with a simple note in his grandfather's shaky handwriting that read only one word in capital letters on the front of the envelope, along with another word below it in smaller letters. The word in capital letters said Marcus, and the word in smaller letters said Open Alone. "You know what I think?" Officer Chen said, joining the growing circle of onlookers. "I think the old man was playing a joke. Probably filled it with newspaper clippings or old socks." More laughter. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. Years of military discipline had taught him patience. He set the briefcase down on the table and looked at the faces around him. Some were genuinely amused, others seemed curious, and a few appeared uncomfortable with the mocking tone their colleagues had adopted. "My grandfather served in the Pacific Theater," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady. "He was at Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and several other places he never talked about. Whatever's in this briefcase, it meant enough to him that he wanted me to have it." Officer Jenkins shrugged. "No disrespect to your grandfather's service, Lieutenant, but come on. It's just an old briefcase. My grandmother left me a box of costume jewelry. These things happen. Old people hold on to stuff that doesn't mean much to anyone else." Captain Morrison entered the break room, her sharp eyes taking in the scene immediately. "Don't you all have work to do?" she asked, her tone leaving no room for argument. The officers dispersed reluctantly, casting backward glances at Marcus and his briefcase. "Lieutenant Doyle," the captain said, approaching him. "May I speak with you privately?" They walked to her office and she closed the door behind them. Captain Sarah Morrison was a veteran herself, Army, with 25 years of service before transitioning to civilian law enforcement. Her office walls were covered with commendations and photographs from her military career. "I apologize for their behavior," she said, gesturing for Marcus to sit. "We're a good department, but we've had some tension lately. Budget cuts, staffing issues, the usual pressures. Some of the younger officers don't fully understand what military service means." Marcus nodded, placing the briefcase on his lap. "I understand, Captain. No harm done." She studied him for a moment. "That briefcase, it's from your grandfather?" "Yes, ma'am. He passed recently. This was the only thing he left me specifically." "Have you opened it yet?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. He left a note asking me to open it alone. I was planning to do that tonight, but I brought it with me today because I'm staying at a hotel while I look for an apartment. Didn't want to leave it in the room." Captain Morrison leaned back in her chair. "My father was a World War II veteran. Navy, like your grandfather, I assume? He never talked much about it either. When he passed, we found boxes of letters he'd written to my mother during the war but never sent. Reading them, we learned more about him in a few hours than we had in decades of living with him." "What did they say?" Marcus asked. That he was terrified most of the time. That he missed home so much it physically hurt. That he witnessed things no human being should ever have to see, but he endured because he believed in something greater than himself. She paused. Whatever's in that briefcase, Lieutenant, it's a piece of your family's history. Don't let anyone diminish that. Marcus spent the rest of the day going through training protocols and familiarizing himself with the department's procedures. The liaison program was designed to last 6 months, during which he would help implement new tactical training methods and serve as a bridge between the military and civilian law enforcement communities. It was an honor to be selected, and he was determined to make a positive impact. By evening, he returned to his modest hotel room. The briefcase sat on the desk, illuminated by the warm glow of the desk lamp. Marcus ordered takeout, showered, and finally settled into the chair facing the briefcase. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the brass clasps. They were stiff with age but functional. With a soft click, they opened. Inside, the briefcase was lined with faded blue fabric. The contents were carefully arranged and remarkably well preserved. On top lay a leather journal, its cover embossed with his grandfather's initials. Beneath it were dozens of letters bound with string, several black and white photographs, a folded map marked with notes in the margins, a purple heart medal in its original case, and something wrapped in cloth at the very bottom. Marcus picked up the journal first and opened to the first page. His grandfather's handwriting, much steadier and younger than the note he'd received, filled the lined pages. January 15, 1943. Today I enlisted. Mother cried. Father shook my hand and told me to make him proud. I'm terrified, but I can't let them see it. The world is at war, and I have to do my part. Marcus read on, page after page chronicling his grandfather's journey from basic training to deployment. The entries were honest and raw, describing the fear of combat, the bonds formed with fellow soldiers, the homesickness that never quite faded. His grandfather wrote about a young woman named Eleanor, his sweetheart back home, and his dreams of the life they would build together after the war. Then came the entry that made Marcus stop reading and take a deep breath. April 23, 1945. We received intelligence about a Japanese facility on a small island. Our mission is to secure documents and equipment before the enemy can destroy them. Lieutenant Harrison says this could help end the war faster. I volunteered for the team. If there's a chance to bring our boys home sooner, I have to take it. The next several entries describe the mission in detail. A small team of soldiers, including his grandfather, had infiltrated the facility under cover of darkness. They encountered resistance but managed to secure a cache of documents. During the escape, his grandfather's unit came under heavy fire. 2 men were wounded. His grandfather carried one of them, Private James Chin, 3 miles through jungle terrain to the extraction point. James kept telling me to leave him, that I wouldn't make it carrying his weight. I told him I didn't come all this way to leave anyone behind. That's what SEALs say now, but back then, it was just what you did for your brothers. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. His grandfather had never mentioned any of this. The quiet, reserved man who had attended a few of Marcus's childhood birthdays and sent cards at Christmas had been a hero who risked everything for his fellow soldiers. The journal continued, describing the aftermath of the mission. The documents they retrieved contained information about supply routes and defensive positions that proved valuable to Allied forces. For his actions, William Doyle was awarded the Purple Heart after being wounded by shrapnel during the extraction. He spent 2 months recovering before returning to duty for the final months of the war. But it was the later entries, written after the war ended, that revealed the deepest truths. August 20, 1945. The war is over. We won, but the cost was higher than anyone who wasn't there could understand. I'm going home to Eleanor, but I'm not the same person who left. How do I explain that to her? How do I go back to a normal life when I've seen what I've seen? His grandfather struggled with what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress. He wrote about nightmares, about jumping at loud noises, about feeling disconnected from the world around him. But he also wrote about Eleanor's patience, about choosing to build a life despite his struggles, about finding purpose in raising a family and being part of his community. I've decided not to talk about the war. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I need to leave it behind to move forward. The men I served with understand. We don't need words. Everyone else sees war as glory and victory. They don't need to know the real price we paid. Marcus set down the journal and picked up the bundle of letters. They were correspondence between his grandfather and Private James Chin, the man he'd carried to safety. The letters spanned decades, chronicling their friendship after the war. James had gone on to become a doctor, married, and had 3 children. In every letter, he expressed gratitude to William for saving his life. One letter in particular stood out. It was dated 1998, 53 years after the war ended. William, my old friend. My granddaughter is graduating from medical school next month. As I watch her achieve her dreams, I think about how none of this would exist if you hadn't refused to leave me behind that night. You gave me my life back, and in doing so, you gave life to my children and grandchildren. You're more than a war hero, William. You're a hero to our entire family. I know you've always downplayed what you did, but I need you to understand the magnitude of your choice. You could have saved yourself. Instead, you saved me, and in doing so, you saved everyone I love who came after. That's not just bravery. That's love in action. Marcus had to set the letter down and wipe his eyes. He thought about Officer Chen at the precinct, who had joined in the mocking earlier. Could there be a connection? He picked up the photographs next. They showed young men in uniform, smiling despite the circumstances. His grandfather looked so young, barely 20 years old, yet his eyes held a depth that came from experiencing things beyond his years. There were group photos, candid shots of camp life, and one particular image that caught Marcus's attention. It showed his grandfather and another soldier standing together, arms around each other's shoulders. On the back, someone had written, "William and James, brothers forever, 1945. The map was marked with routes and positions, military notations that Marcus, with his training, could decipher. It told the story of that crucial mission, showing the path his grandfather and his team had taken. Finally, Marcus unwrapped the cloth bundle at the bottom of the briefcase. Inside was a folded American flag, the kind given to families at military funerals, along with a handwritten letter addressed to Marcus. This one was longer than the note that had come with the briefcase. My dear grandson Marcus, if you're reading this, then I've passed on, and you've opened this briefcase as I asked. I'm sorry we weren't closer during your life. That's my fault, not yours. Watching you join the Navy and become a SEAL filled me with such pride, but it also terrified me. I knew the path you were choosing because I'd walked a similar one. I never talked about my service because I wanted to protect you and your father from the burden of my experiences. But in doing so, I robbed you of knowing who I really was. These items in this briefcase represent the most important period of my life, not because of the combat or the medals, but because that's when I learned what it means to truly serve something greater than yourself. The flag in your hands belonged to Private David Morrison. He was killed in action 2 weeks before the war ended, saving 3 wounded soldiers from an ambush. He had no family left to claim his effects, his parents having passed before the war, so I kept his flag, promising to honor his memory. I'm giving it to you now because I believe you understand the weight of that promise. Marcus, you chose to become a SEAL. That tells me you have the same call to service that I felt at your age. But let me share something I learned too late. True strength isn't just about physical courage or tactical skill. It's about knowing when to be vulnerable, when to ask for help, when to share your burdens with those who care about you. I spent 50 years carrying my war experiences alone, and it diminished my relationships with the people I loved most. Don't make my mistake. Be strong enough to be open. Honor your service by living fully, not by hiding parts of yourself away. The briefcase itself was issued to me when I was assigned temporary administrative duties after recovering from my wounds. I used it to carry important documents, but after the war, it became a container for my memories. Now I'm passing it to you, along with these memories, trusting that you'll understand their value. There's one more thing. James Chin, the man whose life I saved, settled in California after the war. His family grew, and I believe some of his descendants may have followed him into service, military, or law enforcement. I've lost touch with them over the years, But if you ever encounter anyone by that name in your work, treat them with kindness. They carry the legacy of a brave man who never gave up, even when it would have been easier to do so. I'm proud of you, Marcus. I always have been. I'm sorry I wasn't better at showing it. Be the man I know you are, the man you've proven yourself to be. And remember, the greatest battles we fight aren't always on the battlefield. Sometimes they're the daily choice to be better, to serve others, to carry forward the values that matter most. With all my love, your grandfather, William Doyle. Marcus sat in the quiet hotel room, tears streaming down his face. The mocking from earlier in the day seemed trivial now, meaningless in the face of this profound connection to his grandfather and his family's history. He had spent his entire adult life in service, pushing himself to be the best, to earn the SEAL Trident, to prove his worth through action. But he'd never fully understood where that drive came from until now. He carefully examined each item again, this time with new understanding. The Purple Heart represented not just his grandfather's wound, but his willingness to endure pain for a greater cause. The letters showed that heroism wasn't a single act but a lifetime of maintaining bonds and honoring commitments. The journal revealed that even heroes struggled, that strength and vulnerability could coexist. And the flag, Private Morrison's flag, represented the ultimate truth, that service meant honoring those who came before, remembering their sacrifices, and carrying their legacy forward. Marcus spent hours that night organizing everything carefully back into the briefcase. He photographed each item with his phone, wanting to preserve these memories digitally as well. Then he sat down and began writing his own entry in his grandfather's journal, continuing the tradition. October 23, 2025. Today I opened Grandpa's briefcase and discovered who he really was. I feel like I've been given a gift I didn't know I was missing. All these years, I thought I was forging my own path, but I see now that I've been walking in his footsteps. He taught me about service without ever saying a word about his own. That's the kind of man I want to be. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the precinct early. He found Captain Morrison already in her office and knocked on her door. "Lieutenant Doyle," she said, looking up from her paperwork. "You're here early." "Captain, I wanted to thank you for what you said yesterday about my grandfather. You were right. I opened the briefcase last night. And?" Marcus took a breath. "And I learned that my grandfather was a remarkable man who saved lives and carried his experiences with quiet dignity. I also learned something that might interest you. There's a connection to someone in this department." He explained about James Chin and his grandfather's friendship. Captain Morrison listened intently, then picked up her phone. "Officer Chin, could you come to my office, please?" A few minutes later, Officer David Chin appeared at the door, looking uncertain. "You wanted to see me, Captain?" "Come in, officer. Lieutenant Doyle has something he'd like to share with you." Marcus opened the briefcase and carefully removed the letters and photographs. "Officer Chin, I need to ask you something. Did your great-grandfather serve in World War II? Was his name James?" Officer Chin's eyes widened. "Yes, he was. He passed away when I was 10, but I remember him. He was a doctor." "How did you know?" Marcus handed him one of the letters and the photograph of the two young soldiers. "Because my grandfather, William Doyle, saved his life in 1945. And they remained friends for over 50 years. Officer Chin took the photograph with shaking hands, staring at the image of his great-grandfather as a young man. "I've never seen this picture before. My God, he looks so young." "They both were," Marcus said softly. "Your great-grandfather wrote my grandfather letters for decades, thanking him for carrying him 3 miles through jungle terrain when he was wounded. He said that by saving his life, my grandfather gave life to everyone who came after, including you." Officer Chin sat down heavily in the chair, still holding the photograph. "My great-grandfather used to tell us stories, but I was too young to really appreciate them. He always said he owed his life to a friend named William, but I never knew the full story. I never knew." His voice trailed off. Captain Morrison stood and walked to her window, giving the two men a moment. When she turned back, her expression was soft. "This is what service means, gentlemen. It's not just about the missions or the medals. It's about the connections we forge, the lives we touch, and the legacy we leave behind." Marcus spent the rest of the morning sharing his grandfather's journal with Officer Chen, reading passages about the mission and the friendship that followed. They looked through all the letters, piecing together the story of two families connected by an act of courage 80 years ago. By afternoon, word had spread through the precinct about the contents of the briefcase. Officers who had mocked Marcus the day before came to his desk one by one, offering apologies. Officer Jenkins approached last, looking genuinely remorseful. "Lieutenant, I owe you an apology. I was disrespectful yesterday, and I'm sorry. I had no idea what that briefcase contained or what it meant." Marcus nodded. "Apology accepted, officer. But I want you to understand something. Even if the briefcase had been empty, even if it contained nothing but old newspapers, it still would have been valuable because my grandfather thought it was important enough to leave to me. We should never mock someone's inheritance or their family's legacy, no matter what form it takes." Jenkins nodded soberly. "You're right, sir. I learned something today." That evening, Captain Morrison called a special gathering in the precinct's conference room. The entire department assembled, curious about the unexpected meeting. Marcus stood at the front with his briefcase, Officer Chen beside him. Captain Morrison addressed the group. "Today, we learned an important lesson about assumptions and respect. What appeared to be an old, worthless briefcase turned out to contain treasures beyond measure. Lieutenant Doyle's grandfather and Officer Chen's great-grandfather served together in World War II, and their story connects our department in ways we never imagined. Lieutenant Doyle has agreed to share some of that story with us." Marcus opened the briefcase and began to tell his grandfather's story. He read passages from the journal, shared the letters, and explained the significance of each item. He talked about his grandfather's struggles with post-traumatic stress and his decision to build a life despite those challenges. He spoke about the importance of acknowledging our vulnerabilities while maintaining our strength. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Officer Rodriguez stood up. "Sir, thank you for sharing that with us. My grandfather served in Vietnam. He never talked about it either, and he passed away before I was old enough to ask the right questions. I wish I had something like this to help me understand what he went through." Others began sharing their own family stories, creating an unexpected moment of connection. The briefcase had become a catalyst for the department to come together, to see past their daily frustrations and remember the deeper values they all shared. Captain Morrison announced that the department would create a memorial wall honoring the military service of family members connected to current and former officers. "We serve our community now," she said, "but we're all connected to those who served before us. It's important to remember that legacy." In the weeks that followed, Marcus continued his work with the department, but the dynamic had changed. The briefcase incident had broken down barriers and created genuine respect between him and the officers. He implemented new training protocols that emphasized not just tactical skills but also mental health awareness and the importance of supporting one another through difficulties. Officer Chen became one of his closest allies in the department. Together, they organized a presentation for local schools about their grandfather's friendship and the enduring bonds formed through military service. They emphasized themes of courage, perseverance, and the importance of honoring those who came before us. Marcus also reached out to other descendants of his grandfather's unit, tracking them down through military records and veterans organizations. He discovered that Private Morrison, whose flag his grandfather had kept, had a great-niece living in the area. Marcus arranged to meet her and present her with the flag that had been kept safe for 80 years. The woman, Jennifer Morrison, wept when she saw the flag. "I never knew," she said. "My family lost touch with that part of our history. To know that someone cared enough to preserve this, to honor my great-uncle's memory all these years, it means everything." Marcus organized a small ceremony at the local Veterans Memorial to properly honor Private Morrison. Members of the department attended, along with Jennifer's family. It was a moment of closure for a story that had been left unfinished for decades. As the liaison program continued, Marcus found himself thinking often about his grandfather's letter. The advice about being strong enough to be vulnerable resonated deeply. He started an informal support group for officers and military personnel, creating a space where they could talk honestly about the challenges of service without judgment. The group met weekly, sometimes in the precinct's conference room, sometimes at a local community center. They discussed everything from dealing with traumatic incidents to maintaining relationships with family members who didn't understand their work. Marcus shared entries from his grandfather's journal, showing that these struggles weren't new and that previous generations had found ways to cope and thrive. Officer Chin co-facilitated the group, bringing a perspective that bridged military and civilian law enforcement. My great-grandfather wrote in one of his letters that the war taught him the difference between being tough and being strong. Chen shared one evening. Being tough means you don't break under pressure. Being strong means you know when to bend, when to ask for help, when to lean on others. That's the lesson that saved his life and gave him the ability to build a good life after the war. 6 months into the liaison program, Marcus was asked to give a presentation at a regional law enforcement conference. He titled it, "The Briefcase, Lessons in Leadership and Legacy." He brought his grandfather's briefcase with him and shared the story with hundreds of officers and military personnel. "When I inherited this briefcase," he told the audience, "I had no idea it would change my life. I thought I understood service because I'd lived it every day as a SEAL. But my grandfather taught me that service doesn't end when your tour of duty is over. It's how you live your life afterward. It's the connections you maintain, the values you uphold, the example you set for those who come after you." He held up the Purple Heart. This medal represents a moment of courage under fire. But the real courage was in how my grandfather chose to live for 50 years after that moment. He struggled with trauma but didn't let it define him. He honored his fallen comrades by living well. He maintained friendships across decades. He passed down values through his actions, even when he didn't speak about his experiences. The response was overwhelming. Officers approached him afterward to share their own family stories, to ask advice about how to honor their own relatives' service, to express gratitude for putting into words something they'd felt but couldn't articulate. As the 6-month program drew to a close, Marcus faced a decision. He could return to his SEAL team, continue his military career on the path he'd always planned, or he could accept Captain Morrison's offer to join the department permanently in a newly created position focused on training and officer wellness. He sat in his apartment one evening, now fully furnished, with the briefcase open on his desk. He'd added his own items to it, photographs of his team, letters from officers thanking him for his work with the support group, notes from the presentations he'd given. The briefcase was becoming a living document, continuing the legacy his grandfather had started. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his father, something he'd been doing more regularly since opening the briefcase. "Dad, I need to talk to you about a decision I'm making." They talked for over an hour. His father shared his own memories of William Doyle, filling in gaps that the journal hadn't covered. "Your grandfather always said that the best way to honor those who didn't come home was to live fully," his father said. He believed that meant finding where you could do the most good and pouring yourself into that work. The answer became clear. Marcus could do more good here, in this community, building programs that would help current and future officers, than he could by returning to active combat duty. His SEAL training would always be part of who he was, but he could use those skills and experiences in a new way. He accepted Captain Morrison's offer. On his last official day as a liaison and first official day as a permanent member of the department, the precinct held a small celebration. Officer Chin presented him with a framed photograph that had been digitally restored and enhanced. It showed young William Doyle and James Chin in their uniforms, arms around each other, smiling despite the war that surrounded them. Below the image was an engraved plaque that read, "Legacy is not what we leave behind. It's what we carry forward." Captain Morrison promoted Marcus to the position of Director of Training and Officer Wellness. "You've shown us that strength comes in many forms," she said during the ceremony. "You've taught us to honor our past while building our future. Most importantly, you've reminded us why we do this work and who we do it for." That evening, Marcus added one final entry to his grandfather's journal. "The briefcase taught me that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. Every act of courage, every moment of compassion, every decision to serve others creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Grandpa, you thought you were leaving me an old briefcase, but you gave me so much more. You gave me purpose, understanding, and a roadmap for how to live a meaningful life. I promise to honor that gift by carrying your legacy forward, not just in my work but in how I treat every person I encounter. Thank you for trusting me with your story. I won't let you down. Marcus closed the journal and looked at the briefcase, no longer just a weathered leather container but a symbol of connection across generations, proof that one person's choices could echo through time and touch lives they'd never meet. The officers who had once mocked him for inheriting an old briefcase now understood its true value. But more than that, they understood their own value and the importance of the work they did every day. They learned to see past surface appearances to recognize the deeper worth in people and objects that might seem ordinary at first glance. Marcus kept the briefcase in his office, visible on a shelf where officers would see it during meetings and counseling sessions. It became a conversation starter, a teaching tool, and a reminder that everyone has a story worth hearing, a legacy worth honoring, and the potential to impact future generations in ways they might never fully comprehend. The briefcase that had been dismissed as worthless had revealed its true value, not in monetary terms but in the lives it connected, the lessons it taught, and the future it helped shape. What had begun with mockery had transformed into respect, understanding, and a renewed commitment to service that honored those who came before while building something meaningful for those who would come after. And in a way his grandfather could never have anticipated, William Doyle's final gift to his grandson became a gift to an entire community, proving that the most valuable inheritances aren't always the ones that glitter or command high prices. Sometimes they're the ones that help us understand who we are, where we come from, and who we have the potential to become. The story of the briefcase spread beyond the precinct, becoming part of the community's collective memory, inspiring others to seek out their own family histories, to honor their own legacies, and to recognize that every object, every story, and every person carries more value than we might initially perceive. All it takes is the willingness to look deeper, to listen more carefully, and to approach each other with the respect and dignity we all deserve. Marcus Doyle, like his grandfather before him, had learned that true service means more than just showing up for duty. It means being present for others, sharing our burdens and our stories, and building connections that transcend time and circumstance. The briefcase had taught him this lesson, and now he dedicated himself to teaching it to others, ensuring that the legacy of courage, compassion, and commitment would continue for generations to come.